I want to get into the very specific communities that we serve. So now here's the disclaimer. When we are speaking about these three communities, there is no one size fits all. I am making some general observations. I am also giving you statistics that you can research for yourself, and it's an overview. So we're starting with the macro system, political systems and such, and then we go into the educational, religious, and then the community and the family and the individual. With the African American community, some terms that may be offensive. Coon, nigger, colored, which at one point was acceptable until after the Civil Rights Movement. Spook, tar baby, Sambo. There was a very rich culture before slavery. But because we're talking about historical trauma, we are going to start with slavery. So a lot of people don't talk about the history before slavery. It usually starts there. So just for the record, with the Latino and Hispanic community as well, long before that one place where normally people start, there was a very rich culture before that. But because of historical trauma, that's the place where we're going to start. So from a historical context, with slavery, so this group of people were stripped of their culture, their family, their identity, their language, their way of life, taken from them. If they tried to learn anything, they were punished and beaten if they did not conform. So just think about the many different personalities in this room. Regardless of the heaviness of the oppression, some personalities are so strong, they will press against the oppression. And a lot of slaves did that, risking their lives being beaten and a whole lot of other atrocious things. With the Industrial Revolution, so it was still very heavily linked to slavery, and blacks were excluded from equal access to the higher paying jobs. So also the black women, because of the Industrial Revolution, were allowed to access service sector jobs. So there's this dynamic shift that's going to start happening after the Industrial Revolution. With the Civil Rights Movement, race was prioritized over gender within the black community. Within the black community, it was more important as a community to address racism than it was to address sexism during this era. The rise of black women leaders, and there was this tug of war that started to happen within the black household. So we have the Industrial Revolution, which allowed black women to start working. It wasn't, a great job, but they started working. And then you have the Civil Rights Movement, where racism was prioritized over sexism. And you have women who are starting to rise in leadership positions, but it's still under the umbrella of a patriarchal society. So now there's this internal struggle that started to happen. It wasn't that prevalent at that time as a little bit later on, but it started happening at that time. Within the macro system, political, economic, and American culture in general, the political systems are very biased. They're unfair, unequal towards the black community. Is anyone familiar with that book, The New Jim Crow? So that systematic method of incarcerating black men. Now look at the dynamics of that. So if black men are being systematically incarcerated, who's left in the household? Single black mothers. Interesting statistic. Today, there are more African Americans under correctional control, prison, jail, probation, or parole, than there were enslaved in 1850. And that was a decade before the Civil War began. Record accounts of police brutality and unfair treatment from authoritative figures, in addition to racial profiling. In the economic system, the Black community still operated under a biased system that prevented African Americans from securing equal access to jobs or paid less. And the dynamic shift of Black women becoming more financially stable than Black men. The American culture, or the lens through which the American culture views the Black community. So there's a lot of intergenerational oppression, targeted devaluation of the African American man, still under the umbrella of a patriarchal society. Viewed as intellectually inferior, and the mass portrayal of the angry Black woman. In terms of the educational systems, the Black community and mass media, there's a huge disparity in standardized testing. There's no sensitivity to cultural disparities or historical trauma. The systematic closing of schools in neighborhoods where we need them the most, overcrowding of classes, they both make for an inefficient learning environment. In the Black community, there's this overly concern with speaking outside the house. Don't talk about these particular problems. Chronic Black on Black crime as a way to try and resolve conflict. In the media, there's that angry Black woman portrayal. There's disparity in the airing of the number of Black perpetrated crimes versus white perpetrated crimes. If we're talking about the microsystem, the religious beliefs, for the majority of the Black community, it is a Christian belief, and that men are to be the head of the household. In the Black community, you are questioned if Christianity isn't your religion. Lack of female leadership within the Black church started to come up. And the dismissive response to claims of IPV committed by male clergy within the church. The family, Black women are outnumbering Black men in parental responsibility because a lot of them are single parents, systematic incarceration of the Black man. Women are pressured to uphold God's law and stand by your man, which starts to conflict with the independent woman syndrome. The rising absence of fathers or father figures gives the impression that the woman must do it all. That's superwoman syndrome. Within the Black community, amongst peers, they're encouraged to get what's yours. Reluctance to be vulnerable with other people in the community out of fear of lack. If I tell you I got this and I tell you how you get it, you may take it from me. And also, the mentality is get out of the hood instead of fixing it. The individual. So I want to talk about some things individuals may experience, varying individuals within the Black community. So just the language of the Black community, there's Ebonics, how they communicate with each other. It's a broken form of English. My elementary school was very diverse. When I got to high school, I went to Percy Julian. It was predominantly Black. And when I say predominantly, I mean like 90% or so. And that is the very first time I've ever heard anyone tell me, you talk white. So within the Black community, speaking, articulating, can bring ridicule within the Black community. And within the Black community, they just assume that nobody else in the community speaks anything other than English. Our cultural coping mechanisms. How does the Black community normally cope? So if you have a problem, you don't go see a therapist, you go to church. You're in trouble, you go to church. Sometimes they'll call, get their names on the prayer list. These are coping mechanisms culturally amongst the Black community. So I want you all to understand how the community thinks. So going to therapy sometimes is frowned upon You don't need a therapist, you need Jesus. And so they're coming to you with that. Some cultural disorders amongst the Black community is overall poor eating habits. And a lot of that stems from the scraps that slaves were fed. What any community does, when there is a sense of lack, they take that lack and they turn it into something that they can actually use. So within the Black community, because of the really bad food that they had been fed for so many generations, the Black community started to season, do different and creative things with it, which brought about a lot of hypertension, the high blood pressure, diabetes, or sugar. And what I mean by that is if someone from the Black community tells you they have sugar, they're talking about diabetes. A lot of Black communities are food deserts. A food desert is a geographic area where affordable and nutritious food is difficult to obtain, particularly if you don't have transportation. When I lived in Inglewood, I literally had to drive out in order to get fresh produce. At that time, I had to. But if I wanted some fries, some chicken, anything with mild sauce, salt, pepper, anything, I can walk to that. But if I wanted healthy produce, I had to go outside of where I live. So it's a lot of Black communities are food deserts. Some of the health practices of the Black community is the neighborhood clinic or the emergency room. And when we're talking about these communities, I'm not talking about the affluent part of these communities, okay? A lot of them only go when something's wrong. There's the medicine cabinet method. If there's something wrong, there's got to be something in that medicine cabinet for you to take. In my house, it was aspirin. Aspirin cured everything. Chris Rock made a joke, and I just thought about that. He said in his house, it was Robitussin. He said, I don't care if you break your leg, you get that tussin in there, it'll be all right. And it's funny because it's true. A lot of people in the Black community, it's that medicine cabinet method. Another health practice is you pray it away. You pray it away. Pray it away. Absolutely. Lay hands on it. Some community challenges. Within the Black community, sometimes there's, in my house, we weren't allowed to call an argument. It was heated fellowship. Sometimes there's heated fellowship around light-skinned Blacks, dark-skinned Blacks. So light-skinned Blacks and dark-skinned Blacks each have the perception. Statistically, it is true that those who have lighter skin, fairer skin, seem to get treated better. And by better, more privileges, opportunities. Yes, statistically, this is true, and I can find some for you. Also, just within the Black community, remember we were talking about the media and all of these things that we've been seeing? Think about how darker skinned Blacks were treated on television versus the lighter skinned ones. Totally different. And it created a huge disparity amongst the community themselves, especially since it's not something they can even control. There's a conflict very prevalent right now amongst natural hair versus weaves and relaxers. I even turned on the television one day and there was about 3 Black women on this side and about 3 Black women on this side on the panel, and they were going at it about hair. So sometimes there is the attitude of your history should be represented, so you should wear your hair in its natural state. And that if you wear a weave or relax, you are trying to look white. So I'm going to talk about IPV specifically within the Black community. Black women are 3 times as likely to experience death as a result of IPV than their white counterparts. 3 times as likely. For Black women, there's a strong sense of cultural affinity and loyalty. that renders a lot of them silent sometimes. And it's like, with the new Jim Crow, do I really want to send another black man to jail? It really wasn't that bad. If I just leave instead of sending this person to jail. With the black men, most black men do not report IPV, largely because they are a black man and they want to make sure that that portrayal of a strong black man is intact, and somehow saying that they had been abused by a female somehow diminishes that. And they feel like they can handle it on their own in general.